Alfred Tennyson, 1st Baron Tennyson, FRS, was Poet Laureate of Great Britain and Ireland during much of Queen Victoria's reign and remains one of the most popular British poets. Tennyson excelled at penning short lyrics, such as Break, 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 The Charge of the Light Brigade, Tears, Idle Tears, and Crossing the Bar. Much of his verse was based on classical mythological themes, such as Ulysses, although In Memoriam A.H.H.was was written to commemorate his friend Arthur Hallam, a fellow poet and student at Trinity College, Cambridge, after he died of a stroke at the age of 22. Tennyson also wrote some notable blank verse including Idylls of the King, Ulysses, and Tithonus. During his career, Tennyson attempted drama, but his plays enjoyed little success. A number of phrases from Tennyson's work have become commonplaces of the English language, including nature, red in tooth and claw, 'tis better to have loved and lost than never to have loved at all, there's not a reason why, there's but to do and die. My strength is as the strength of 10, because my heart is pure. To strive, to seek, to find, and not to yield. Knowledge comes, but wisdom lingers, and the old order changeth, yielding place to new. He is the 9th most frequently quoted writer in the Oxford Dictionary of Quotations. Early life. Tennyson was born in Somersby, Lincolnshire, England. He was born into a middle-class line of Tennysons, but also had a noble and royal ancestry. His father, George Clayton Tennyson, was rector of Somersby, also rector of Bennyworth and Bag Enderby, and vicar of Grimsby. Rev. George Clayton Tennyson raised a large family and was a man of superior abilities and varied attainments, who tried his hand with fair success in architecture, painting, music, and poetry. He was comfortably well off for a country clergyman, and his shrewd money management enabled the family to spend summers at Marblethorpe and Skegness, on the eastern coast of England. Alfred Tennyson's mother, Elizabeth Fitcher, was the daughter of Stephen Fitcher, vicar of St. James Church, Louth, and rector of Withcall, a small village between Horncastle and Louth. Tennyson's father carefully attended to the education and training of his children. Tennyson and two of his elder brothers were writing poetry in the teens, and a collection of poems by all three was published locally when Alfred was only 17. One of those brothers, Charles Tennyson Turner, later married Louisa Selwood, the younger sister of Alfred's future wife. The other was Frederick Tennyson. Another of Tennyson's brothers, Edward Tennyson, was institutionalized at a private asylum. Education and first publication. Tennyson was a student of Louth Grammar School for 4 years and then attended Skate Cliff School, Englefield Green, and King Edward VI Grammar School, Louth. He entered Trinity College, Cambridge, in 1827, where he joined a secret society called the Cambridge Apostles. A portrait of Tennyson by George Frederick Watts is in Trinity's collection. At Cambridge, Tennyson met Arthur Henry Hallam and William Henry Brookfield, who became his closest friends. His first publication was a collection of his boyish rhymes and those of his elder brother Charles, entitled Poems by Two Brothers, published in 1827. In 1829, Tennyson was awarded the Chancellor's Gold Medal at Cambridge for one of his first pieces, Timbuktu. Reportedly, it was thought to be no slight honor for a young man of 20 to win the Chancellor's Gold Medal. He published his first solo collection of poems chiefly lyrical, in 1830. Clarabelle and Mariana, which later took the place among Tennyson's most celebrated poems, were included in this volume. Although decried by some critics as overly sentimental, his verse soon proved popular and brought Tennyson to the attention of well-known writers of the day, including Samuel Taylor Coleridge. returned to Lincolnshire and second publication. In the spring of 1831, Tennyson's father died, requiring him to leave Cambridge before taking his degree. He returned to the rectory, where he was permitted to live for another 6 years and shared responsibility for his widowed mother and the family. Arthur Hallam came to stay with his family during the summer and became engaged to Tennyson's sister, Amelia Tennyson. In 1833, Tennyson published his second book of poetry, which included his well-known poem, The Lady of Shalott. The volume met heavy criticism, which so discouraged Tennyson that he did not publish again for 10 years, although he did continue to write. The same year, Hallam died suddenly and unexpectedly after suffering a cerebral hemorrhage while on vacation in Vienna. Hallam's death had a profound impact on Tennyson and inspired several poems, including In the Valley of Cauteretz and In Memoriam A.H.H., a long poem detailing the way of the soul. Tennyson and his family were allowed to stay in the rectory for some time, but later moved to High Beach, Essex, about 1837, leaving in 1840. An unwise investment in an ecclesiastical wood-carving enterprise soon led to the loss of much of the family fortune. Tennyson then moved to London and lived for a time at Chapel House, Twickenham. Third publication. In 1842, while living modestly in London, Tennyson published the 2-volume poems, of which the first included works already published and the second was made up almost entirely of new poems. They met with immediate success. Poems from this collection, such as Locksley Hall, Tithonus, and Ulysses, have met enduring fame. The Princess, a medley, a satire on women's education that came out in 1847, was also popular for its lyrics. W.S. Gilbert later adapted and parodied the piece twice, in The Princess and in Princess Ida. It was in 1850 that Tennyson reached the pinnacle of his career, finally publishing his masterpiece, In Memoriam A.H.H., dedicated to Hallam. Later the same year, he was appointed Poet Laureate, succeeding William Wordsworth. In the same year, Tennyson married Emily Selwood, whom he had known since childhood, in the village of Shiplake. They had 2 sons, Hallam Tennyson, named after his friend, and Lionel. Tennyson rented Farringford House on the Isle of Wight in 1853, eventually buying it in 1856. He eventually found that there were too many star-struck tourists who pestered him in Farringford, so he moved to Aldworth, in West Sussex in 1869. However, he retained Farringford, and regularly returned there to spend the winters. Poet Laureate. In 1850, after William Wordsworth's death and Samuel Rogers' refusal, Tennyson was appointed to the position of Poet Laureate. Elizabeth Barrett Browning and Leigh Hunt had also been considered. He held the position until his own death in 1892, the longest tenure of any laureate before or since. Tennyson fulfilled the requirements of this position by turning out appropriate but often uninspired verse, such as a poem of greeting to Princess Alexandra of Denmark when she arrived in Britain to marry the future King Edward VII. In 1855, Tennyson produced one of his best-known works, The Charge of the Light Brigade, a dramatic tribute to the British cavalrymen involved in an ill-advised charge on the 25th of October 1854, during the Crimean War. Other esteemed works written in the post of Poet Laureate include Ode on the Death of the Duke of Wellington and Ode sung at the opening of the International Exhibition. Tennyson initially declined a baronetcy in 1865 and 1868, finally accepting a peerage in 1883 at Gladstone's earnest solicitation. In 1884 Victoria created him Baron Tennyson, of Aldworth in the county of Sussex and of Freshwater in the Isle of Wight. He took his seat in the House of Lords on the 11th of March 1884. Tennyson also wrote a substantial quantity of unofficial political verse, for the bellicose form, rifleman form, on the French crisis of 1859 and the creation of the volunteer force, to steersmen been not precipitate in thine act of steering, deploring Gladstone's Home Rule Bill. Virginia Woolf wrote a play called Freshwater, showing Tennyson as host to his friends Julia Margaret Cameron and G.F. Watts. Tennyson was the first to be raised to a British peerage for his writing. A passionate man with some peculiarities of nature, he was never particularly comfortable as a peer, and it is widely held that he took the peerage in order to secure a future for his son Hallam. Colonel George Edward Garrard, Thomas Edison's European agent, made sound recordings of Tennyson reading his own poetry late in his life. They include recordings of the charge of the Light Brigade, and excerpts from The Splendor Falls, Come Into the Garden, Ask Me No More, Ode on the Death of the Duke of Wellington, and Lancelot and Elaine. The sound quality is poor, as wax cylinder recordings usually are. Towards the end of his life, Tennyson revealed that his religious beliefs also defied convention, leaning towards agnosticism and pantheism. Famously, he wrote in Memoriam, "There lives more faith in honest doubt, believe me, than in half the creeds." Quote, in Maud, 1855, he wrote, "The churches have killed the Christ." In Locksley Hall 60 years after Tennyson wrote, "Christian love among the churches looked the twin of heathen hate." In his play Becket, he wrote, "We are self-uncertain creatures, and we may, yea, even when we know not, mix our spites and private hates with our defense of heaven." Tennyson recorded in his diary, "I believe in pantheism of a sort." His son's biography confirms that Tennyson was not an orthodox Christian, noting that Tennyson praised Giordano Bruno and Spinoza on his deathbed, saying of Bruno, "His view of God is in some ways mine." In 1892, Tennyson continued writing into his 80s. He died on the 6th of October 1892 at Aldworth, aged 83. He was buried at Westminster Abbey. A memorial was erected in All Saints' Church, Freshwater. His last words were, "Oh, that press will have me now." He left an estate of £57,206. He was succeeded as second Baron Tennyson by his son, Hallam, who produced and authorised biography of his father in 1897, and was later the second Governor-General of Australia. Tennyson and the Queen. Though Prince Albert was largely responsible for Tennyson's appointment as Laureate, Queen Victoria became an ardent admirer of Tennyson's work, writing in her diary that she was much soothed and pleased by reading In Memoriam A.H.H. after Albert's death. The two met twice, first in April 1862, when Victoria wrote in her diary, "Very peculiar looking, tall, dark, with a fine head, long black flowing hair and a beard, oddly dressed, but there is no affectation about him." Tennyson met her a second time nearly 2 decades later, and the Queen told him what a comfort In Memoriam A.H.H. had been. The art of Tennyson's poetry. As source material for his poetry, Tennyson used a wide range of subject matter ranging from medieval legends to classical myths and from domestic situations to observations of nature. The influence of John Keats and other Romantic poets published before and during his childhood is evident from the richness of his imagery and descriptive writing. He also handled rhythm masks masterfully. The insistent beat of break, break, break emphasizes the relentless sadness of the subject matter. Tennyson's use of the musical qualities of words to emphasize his rhythms and meanings is sensitive. The language of "I come from haunts of coot and hern" lilts and ripples like the brook in the poem, and the last two lines of "Come down, O maid, from yonder mountain height" illustrate his telling combination of onomatopoeia, alliteration, and assonance, the moan of doves in immemorial elms and murmuring of innumerable bees. Tennyson was a craftsman who polished and revised his manuscripts extensively, to the point where his efforts at self-editing were described by his contemporary Robert Browning as insane, symptomatic of mental infirmity. Few poets have used such a variety of styles with such an exact understanding of meter. Like many Victorian poets, he experimented in adapting the quantitative meters of Greek and Latin poetry to English. He reflects the Victorian period of his maturity in his feeling for order and his tendency towards moralizing. He also reflects a concern common among Victorian writers in being troubled by the conflict between religious faith and expanding scientific knowledge. Like many writers who write a great deal over a long time, his poetry is occasionally uninspired, but his personality rings throughout all his works. Tennyson possessed a strong poetic power, which his early readers often attributed to his Englishness and his masculinity. Well known among his longer words are Maud and Idylls of the King, the latter arguably the most famous Victorian adaptation of the legend of King Arthur and the Knights of the Round Table. A common thread of grief, melancholy, and loss connects much of his poetry, possibly reflecting Tennyson's own lifelong struggle with debilitating depression. T.S. Eliot famously described Tennyson as the saddest of all English poets, whose technical mastery of verse and language provided a surface to his poetry's depths, to the abyss of sorrow. Other poets such as W.H. Auden maintained a more critical stance, stating that Tennyson was the stupidest of all the English poets, adding that there was little about melancholia he didn't know, there was little else that he did. Partial list of works. From poems, chiefly lyrical: Nothing Will Die, All Things Will Die, The Dying Swan, The Kraken, Mariana, Lady Clara Vere de Vere. From poems, The Lotos Eaters, The Lady of Shalott, 3 versions painted by J.W. Waterhouse, St. Simeon Stylites. From poems, Locksley Hall, Tithonus, Vision of Sin, The Two Voices, Ulysses. For the Princess, a medley, The Princess, Godiva Now Sleeps, The Crimson Petal. It later appeared as a song in the film Vanity Fair, with musical arrangement by Michael Danner. Tears, Idle Tears, In Memoriam A.H.H.was, Ring Out, Wild Bells, The Eagle, The Sisters' Shame. From Maud, a monodrama. Maud, The Charge of the Light Brigade. An early recording exists of Tennyson reading this. Idylls of the King. From Enoch Arden and Other Poems. Enoch Arden. The book contains the line, For men may come and men may go, but I go on forever, which inspired the naming of a men's club in New York City. Flower in the Craned Wall. The Window Song Cycle with Arthur Sullivan. Harold began a revival of interest in King Harold. Idylls of the King. Montenegro. Beckett. Crossing the Bar. The Foresters, a play with incidental music by Arthur Sullivan. Carpiolani. Tennyson Heraldry. An heraldic achievement of Alfred, Lord Tennyson exists in an 1884 stained glass window in the hall of Trinity College, Cambridge, showing arms, gules, a bend nebulae thereon, a chaplet vert between 3 leopards' faces, jacinth, a lys of the second, crest, a dexter, arm in armor, the hand in a gauntlet, a grasping a broken tilting spear infiled with a garland of laurel, supporters, 2 leopards rampant Saint Gardant Gules Sem Acuti de Listen Ducely Crowned or Motto Respicians Prospicians looking forwards. These are a difference of the arms of Thomas Tennyson, Archbishop of Canterbury, themselves a difference of the arms of the 13th century Denys family of Glamorgan and Siston in Gloucestershire, themselves a difference of the arms of Thomas de Cantilupe, Bishop of Hereford, thenceforth the arms of the See of Hereford. The name Tennyson signifies Denys's son, although no connection between the two families is recorded. Bibliography: Alfred, Lord Tennyson Tennyson, a selected edition, ISBN 0-520-06588-3 or ISBN 0-520-06666-9, edited with a preface and notes by Christopher Ricks. Selections from the definitive edition: The Poems of Tennyson, with readings from the Trinity MSS. Long works like Morden, In Memoriam A.H.H., are printed in full.